Hello, beautiful people, and thank you for joining me today on Phoenix Rising, A Way Towards Health. I'm your host, Krista Townsend, and it is my mission to bring you information about alternative and holistic healing methods, products, and services. So I'm really excited about my guest today. For me, it was like having a rock star coming on. I really believe in what he's doing, and personally, it aligns with my beliefs in health and healing. So please help me to welcome Dr. Jared Seigler. Dr. Seigler is a doctor of chiropractic and has been a certified functional medicine provider for the past 8 years. He's trained in over 400 hours of functional neurology to help promote the growth, development, and healing of the central nervous system. For the past 4 years, he's served as the clinical director for the Living Proof Institute. His focus is to bring awareness to the healing potential of the human body and to help provide solutions to the rising occurrence of chronic disease, which is rampant in our society, and we'll definitely talk about that later. So welcome, Dr. Seigler.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. It's great to have you. And to get started, I always like to talk about how we met. Yeah, so I met you at our community pool one day and just happened to ask you what you did for a living and was, the quarantine affecting you. And you said, well, you probably have never heard of this. And you said, I'm a functional medicine doc. And I would just jumped on that because I was like, wow, I want to get my health coaching certification in functional medicine. And boy, do I know what that is. And so that's just kind of what started.
It's kind of unique because, in the functional medicine space, it's such a small community. We just usually tell a lot of doctors, like Dr. Hyman is probably one of the more famous functional medicine doctors. And I say, you go to the mall and ask 100 people who Dr. Hyman is, and 100 people are probably going to say, who?
Are you talking about Dr. Mark Hyman?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you take,
I was just watching him yesterday, actually.
So you take one of the more prevalent functional medicine doctors, and to me that's the misery of functional medicine is people aren't aware that there's an alternative. Mm-hmm. Or we call it an alternative because really, if you think about the way the body develops, we were designed to heal. And
right.
To me,
exactly.
That's where, when I see the body healing, I think, wow, we're just really doing what the body was meant to do. We're just giving it the ability to do what it was meant to do. Because, we might give people specific diets or supplements or brain exercises or even medications, but at the end of the day, their body's going to fix itself.
Right. The human body is a self-healing mechanism, and it is built into our DNA. It was designed to self-heal if you nourish it and give it what it needs.
Yeah.
It's really very simple and basic. So, let's just start there. How would you, what exactly is functional medicine and how is it different than conventional medicine?
Yeah. So functional medicine, by definition, is kind of an individualized, root cause analysis. I was just actually discussing two people's, so sometimes we'll do what's called an adrenal stress test to see, can somebody's adrenals, handle that sleep-wake cycle? Can they handle stress, be it physical, mental, emotional, chemical? And there's this purveyor of just kind of backing up adrenal fatigue, which is a myth, but we can get into that later. But they were both flatlined, where we didn't see that rise of cortisol, because as soon as you open your eyes, you're supposed to just be like, hey, I'm awake. I need to start being alert and active. I got to go forage and hunt and run from predators. But we didn't see that. And, we would want to ask why instead of what with functional medicine. We always want to ask why, because even though these two very different people's tests looked exactly the same, in the example I gave for them is one lady hit her head, and her brain could no longer tell her adrenals what to do, because the brain is middle and upper management, and a lot of our organs are maybe just employees. So I say nobody's really telling the employees what to do, so they're just standing around doing nothing, because that's what employees do. Versus the other lady, she got bitten by a tick and got Lyme disease, and the way that specific pathogen works for maybe someone that has the wrong genetic makeup, turned on some genes, and she could no longer make that hormone anymore. So even though it might look the same and we say, oh, let's maybe, give our adrenal supplement or something like that, the reason why that their adrenals isn't working is completely different. And so the path to healing for them would be completely different too. So that's kind of just in a nutshell, the premise of functional medicine is we don't treat the test results or that, we look at a person as an individual, and see like what's the accumulation of, what got somebody to where they are today, and what's causing systems to break, like what's driving this, what areas are being affected more than others, and what can we do to try to position the body in a state of healing, and what can we do to encourage that healing. I try to always apply the KISS principle, so I just think of it as simple math: get rid of the bad, add the good. It's just, when we think of functional medicine, it's actually kind of becoming green medicine, where now it's like, hey, take this supplement instead of this pill, without really even understanding back to the why. It's becoming like a this for that approach.
Right.
And I have nothing.
And I found this chart too. I just thought I'd bring it here, like conventional medicine versus functional medicine. So basically, like functional medicine is health-oriented as opposed to disease-oriented, patient-centered versus doctor-centered, holistic, which, if we want to define, how would you define holistic?
When the body is telling us something is wrong, that's what we call a symptom. And our knee-jerk reflex is to usually suppress that symptom. Get rid of the pain, drink the coffee for the energy, take this for the headache, take this for my indigestion. But that symptom is our body like telling us what's wrong, or something is wrong. And when I'm usually working with somebody, I say, I know it sounds weird, we have to honor these symptoms. Like your body is like screaming at you to please help. And to ignore that cry is just like not something that we would want to do. So to me, holistic, I would say, is like kind of the way it sounds, like looking at something for what it is.
And treating all levels of the person, like the mental, emotional, spiritual, and not just the physical.
And I'm not against the allopathic model. That's a great model, but it was built off of gunshot wounds, and like it was built after World War II, really, more than anything. Like, what surgeries, how can we keep someone alive? And I'm alive because of ERs. A lot of my patients and family members are alive because of emergency rooms.
Right, it's better at acute.
Yeah, we rock and roll with that.
But chronic disease
People just fall
failing,
through the
I
cracks.
think. Yeah,
the list of specialists gets longer and longer, and nothing against that. I say, you don't want me doing your brain surgery, because that's not my training. If you need a brain surgeon, man, you want one. But if that brain surgeon is removing your brain cancer, their job isn't to understand, well, why did these cells go rogue, and why did you develop cancer to begin with? And so unfortunately, these doctors, as great as they are, the system teaches them to just hone in on one area and maybe not step back at this mile-high view and think about, well, hey, this person maybe was a welder, and maybe they got exposed to like really high levels of like this toxic cadmium, and maybe that was contributing to their brain cancer or something. And that's okay. It's just a training issue.
Right. So basically, you're going to look at what caused it, because just because the surgeon can go in there and cut it out doesn't mean it might not come back if you don't address the underlying cause and symptoms. And basically, to me, my understanding of symptoms, because I want to talk about that, is because your body is a feedback loop, and it's whenever you're doing something it doesn't like, or is not good for it, or it's going to give you feedback, and that's what symptoms and pain is that feedback. And so just to treat the symptoms only is not necessarily treating the cause or getting at the cause. So that, I wanted you to talk about that a little more about. And you said something earlier that I really like, that symptoms are your body's smoke detectors. It's a warning system.
Yeah.
And basically, if you're just treating the symptoms with medication, you're just dampening down that warning system.
And I mean, and back to the current healthcare model, that like what insurance pays for is you just have to be sicker than the next person. Like I see so many people, they're like, well, my blood work's normal. I'm like, you just might not be more of a diabetic than the person before you. If they were more diabetic than you, they got that label. And then we just hone in on, well, here's a drug for that label. Here's your metformin, versus, well, as maybe they're stressed driving their blood sugar high, and they're like, I don't eat carbohydrates. Maybe they have inflammation in their gut that whenever they eat spikes their blood sugar, because inflammation will always cause insulin resistance. So when someone's like, oh, I get tired after I eat, or I have these blood sugar issues, I'm like, that's the very beginning stages. And from like a functional perspective, when I would look at something simple like a fasting blood sugar, 85 to 87 is ideal. When people are like, I'm at 99, my doctor said watch and wait, I'm like, that's the smoke detectors going off. They've been going off for a little bit for you to get all the way to 99. They're just going to wait for your house to be burning down so much your blood sugar's finally over 126. I can finally give you a label and I can finally give you a medication. And I call it painting the leaves green. It didn't help the health of that tree, but it looks good on paper, like, hey, we got your blood sugar back down.
Right,
and they're like, well, I still have diabetic neuropathy. I'm still feeling old. I'm still not having energy. I'm still like having constipation or whatever, whatever symptoms are going on with that individual. And we just kind of like try to hold somebody together until they're 65, and now it's a taxpayer burden.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's the sad truth of it. That's what insurance is trying to do. They're just trying to hold people enough together until they're like, whew, okay, I don't have to cover them anymore.
Right.
Because if you look at our current healthcare model, if you look at
It's
17,
really a sick care model.
it is. If you
Instead
look
of preventive, medicine.
If you look at the top 17 countries, which are considered like maybe the most industrialized, if it was a racetrack, we're the slowest car on the track, but we're the most expensive car on the track. For $1, our health outcomes are far worse than any other countries. I mean, and when we think about basic things, like glyphosate's one of those common things.
And glyphosate is something that's in the
Roundup.
food.
Yeah,
Right.
well, not all food.
Oh, okay. Well, Roundup.
Because there's countries that'll ban.
But in a roundabout way, it gets in the food because they're spraying the food or the crops.
I mean, but there's countries out there like Russia and China that
have
won't
banned
consume.
it.
Yeah, they've
Right.
banned. They
I know.
will not feed that to their population
Right.
because they understand that, man, this is really bad. But
Right.
our tax dollars here magically make it cheaper. So now we're eating it 3 times a day. We're shoveling it in most people's faces because it's super cheap. It tastes super good because those companies know what they're doing.
Right. But can cause a lot of health issues because it's toxins.
And when we think of like a functional medicine thing, to me, and back to the smoke detector, I just say it's usually easier to just pour less fuel on a fire than to try to add more fire extinguishers. Like, well, here's more pills, here's this, here's that. Like, usually I find doing less is actually much more effective. But we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket either, because it's usually not like one thing that got somebody sick.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, I came across a couple of quotes that I wanted to run by because I really liked them. And to me, it kind of lends itself to functional medicine. But the first one is, the good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who has the disease. And this is Sir William Osler that said that. And then the other one is, the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his or her patients in care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. So to me, that's kind of leaning towards what functional medicine philosophy is. Because it's trying to look at the person, overall, holistically, look at the underlying causes, and then treat the causes instead of just the symptoms.
Yeah. And that's where I find it more empowering for people too, because I've never like accidentally fallen and just something land in my mouth. Like there's a choice. Like I either want to feel bad or I want to feel good. And that's where we don't want to maybe necessarily, like when we think of diet, just paint somebody in a corner, because then they hate their life, they feel ostracized. So I usually try to meet people where they're at, but there's like a few like strategic things I say, hey, you should probably like not bend on that. Like, but for a lot of people, they just don't understand what food actually does to them, or the chemicals. Because like back to the glyphosate, I ate cheeseburgers from McDonald's growing up. That was a treat. Like once a month I would be able to get to go to McDonald's and get a Happy Meal. So it was very rare. But when we think back to glyphosate, that wasn't even legal till 1996. So the cheeseburger and the Happy Meal, it was nothing like what kids are exposed to now. It might look the same and taste even better, but chemically it's completely foreign to our body.
Well, there was no GMOs. The wheat was not like it is now, with obviously hybrid and GMOs.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference in the
And
food
cow
supply right
feed,
now.
yeah.
Well, and I saw something else too, because I did want to talk about how chronic disease and autoimmune disease is really rampant in our society right now. And I saw this one thing. It was called it was a scientific study called the Law of 20. Have you heard of that?
No.
And it says the law of 20 states that 20 years after refined carbohydrates and processed foods are introduced into a society, they will begin to suffer from problems like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and other illnesses. The more that society eats that kind of food, the more illnesses they have. This has been shown time and time again, country after country.
Yeah, when people immigrate to the U.S., within a few years, like their statistical risk of like breast cancers and things like that will just be the same as a natural born citizen here. So,
wow.
And that's
because
where,
of processed food. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and the high carbs. Yeah, because I'm a big proponent of eating whole foods and cutting way back on processed food, because that really made a difference in my high blood pressure. Was going organic and going back to nature and lots of fruits and vegetables, raw. I eat a lot of that. I do still eat meat, but just like chicken, turkey, and fish in
I eat
small
tons of
amounts.
meat.
You do. I don't. Personally, I don't.
So, and that's like
but
paleo
I know
is a
it's
big
different
thing.
for everybody, and I'm not here to promote one certain diet, but I do believe in the closer you can get to nature in the food that you eat, the better for your body, because we are organic beings, and organic food is what resonates with our constitution.
Yeah.
So, but I know, I wanted to talk about that. What you think, is contributing to chronic disease, and
it's probably a little bit of everything, because I know people that eat like crap that feel great, and their testing comes back fine, and magically they can do it. They can detoxify. Their immune system's not freaking out. But if I had to honestly peg it, I would just say our society in general, when we think about because there are a lot of things on an individual basis, like toxins, like Mexico City, for example, is one of the epicenters where they'll do a lot of studies for toxins related to healthcare of its citizens, because it's a very dirty place. Like the smog and the air quality is extremely poor there. So they're like, hey, there's some chemical stuff, but if you look at stuff like Centaurians and read that book, The Blue Zones, like who's living to be 100 years old, they might smoke and do all this bad stuff, but they had a purpose, and they felt like they were fulfilling that purpose, and they were more in tune psychologically. Like one of my friends is actually up at Harvard, and they're doing a thing called the MEN Project. They only have a few, maybe certain ways to test the brain in the entire world the way they can up there. And I just asked him, what's really driving people's, because I love the brain, and I was like, what's driving everybody's, why is everybody's brains just going to crap? And he just said chronic stress, without even thinking, hey, maybe this infection, maybe this heavy metal.
Right.
And he was just
and you're talking about Alzheimer's and dementia increasing
and
that.
he was just some sort of chronic everyday stress, either their job or a relationship or where they're at with themselves. And I was like, he's talking about kind of psychology almost at this point.
And we live in a high stress society.
Yeah. And and that's where
and
some
very
people,
fast-paced.
a lot of the people I work with have already started to limit their diet. Usually they start to limit it where they're on I'm low FODMAP, I'm AIP, I've eliminated nightshades, and they've put all the eggs in that food basket, and they're like, oh, I'm afraid of carrots. I eat carrots, I bloat. And when we get to the point where we start reintroducing foods, because that's one of the best things you can do, is just eat a diversity of vegetables. Our ancestors would eat over 500 different foods a year. We're at these are my 3 favorite breakfasts. I go here for lunch, or I eat leftovers. Here's a few snacks. Here's the 10 dinners, and I just rotate. And so maybe we're getting 40 or 50 different foods. So when we think of that other end of the spectrum, some people start limiting. They're the healthier I eat, the more bloated I feel. This is so weird. And we're yeah, you just can't process those things. But anyways, I tell them, if you're going to start eating the carrots again, you can't think the carrot's causing something wrong, because it already happened. It's called the placebo effect. I know it might sound weird, but that's one of my favorite things to use clinically. Because if somebody believes that the diet will help them, we have what's called the nocebo effect, where it's actually stronger than the placebo effect. Whereas if we view something as going to harm us, the odds of our body actually starting that chemical process, that fight or flight and fear, already happened, and it's stronger. So that's where we want to kind of sometimes not have these maybe food associations, just kind of come into it unbiased.
That's interesting. Well, and I think that could apply to, I'm not going to go into this though, but the V that's going around, I think sometimes too, like just your fear related to that, or, you know, can play into that
and
as
you know,
well.
things have to be made twice, you know. First, like, that's where I always like the idea of the iPhone, just the fact it was a touch screen. But if you look at Steve Jobs, he actually invented it in his head back in the 70s. He's like, I had it up here, I just couldn't put it here. So we create something in our mind first before anything is ever going to be made in our reality.
This show was in my mind for a year before it became a reality. Yeah, to do this podcast.
I mean, everything's energy. And this is where we can think about a lot of things, but that's back to like maybe from a functional medicine standpoint, like we want patients and people and clients that are like, I want to do this. I want to take care of myself, because the easy part is doing the testing and buying the pills and swiping a credit card. The hard part is like, what's your end of the deal? Because I really make sure, like, I can't sleep for you, I can't exercise or not exercise. You'd be surprised how many people can't even, back to the body-giving symptoms, that fatigue that you feel and that, like, having to push yourself to exercise, that's your body saying, I can't heal metabolically. I already have too much going on. Now you're just going to add more to the plate. So fatigue is actually, and I know it's weird because I know a lot of people, and the people I work with, they're usually like, I exercise, I do all this stuff, and I'm just like, you need to exercise less. And they're like, but what? And I'm like, well, you just told me you feel like crap after you exercise. Like, listen to your body. Again, we want to just listen to it and accept it for what it is, and not put our spin on it. Well, I need to do high intensity interval training because this blogger, the internet said that's the best way for me to lose fat. And I'm like, yeah, it's also the metabolically most demanding thing you can do as well. Because if you can't do something like a sprint for 10 seconds, which nobody really can, everybody in the entire world starts slowing down after like some 7 seconds sprinting. That means your body put forth everything it could for that 7 seconds.
Right.
And that's extremely hard to do. So like back to chronic fatigue is usually one of somebody's like biggest symptoms. And it just kind of, people will fight through that as long as they can until they realize, like, how long you been tired? They're like, 15 years now. Like, we're like,
that's not good.
Okay, yeah,
that's
you know.
A long time
they're
to be
like,
tired.
hey, I'll drink more coffee. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll try that. So we'll see them kind of just slowly dig in that energy grave sometimes. But I just tell them, like, your body's already good at being stressed and freaking out. Like, you need to teach your body how to relax. Like, one of the main reasons I love yoga isn't to try to do balance or funny poses. It's because it's if it's a good yoga, it should teach somebody to be present in the moment, which most people aren't. It should teach them body awareness. They should be in control of their breath. Because when we think of, I love the brain probably more than any organ. Oh, it's so awesome. But if you look at that, like, sympathetic fight or flight response, our body has what's called a cell danger response. Meaning a cell senses the environment outside of it or the environment inside of it starting to go down, and instead of having those mitochondria, those little engines, they're not engines anymore, they're battleships. They start shooting out this energy and this ATP outside of the cell, kind of like a SOS flare. And the immune system sees that on the horizon, and now the immune system's like, let's go cause some inflammation. We either got to heal, or there's an infection, or whatever, we're just going to fight it. But one of the things that can drive that cell danger response, where every cell changes, is adrenaline and noradrenaline. Once the brain starts secreting those hormones and sending out different signals, cells have no choice but to respond to that. So back to chronic stress, people just, maybe one of my favorite things is we'll just have people, I give all my patients a gratitude journal.
Okay. Very good.
The 5-minute
nice.
journal. So that's where I say, as soon as you wake up and before you go to bed, you have like a window into your subconscious. Because if you can start realizing what you're grateful for, what you're achieving, you start telling yourself a different thing. Instead of worrying about this and watching the news and because the reason gratitude is so great, if fear and anxiety and stress kind of pull us into that sympathetic, gratitude and generosity are some of the more parasympathetic or rest and digest emotions. Because with gratitude, we realize we're safe. We realize we're probably going to wake up tomorrow, which back in a hunter-gatherer society was kind of like flipping a coin, I would imagine. But then to me, one of the things I really love is generosity. That speaks to you subconsciously, and it says, I have so much. I can give of my resources to somebody else, and they don't even have to help me out, and I'm still going to survive.
I love it.
That really tells your body that you're safe.
That's beautiful.
So if we can have people just start focusing on like, hey, I know you're tired, I know you can't play with your kids, but let's just start focusing on what you can. Let's focus on these achievable goals that you can, and start just at least shifting that energy.
Well, and I'm a big proponent of yoga. I'm a yogi, and I've been practicing for over 20 years, and I can really attest to the benefits of that. I mean, not only flexibility and strengthening, but just being able to find a calm center within myself and focus, and it really does. It's meditative. It really is. It's like a meditation in motion.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought that up.
One of my favorite markers is actually heart rate variability. And that's where like people will maybe wear Oura rings, but that's where your heart can bump like that. But you have the ability to change, so you have kind of this flexibility. How much like variety can my body handle? Because back to like why our chronic disease is rising more and more, we have what we call an allostatic load, where we're going to bend. I'm stressed, so I'm bending. Then I get in a car wreck, I bend a little more. I'm not eating good, I bend a little more. Now I got sick, bam, I broke.
Right.
So yeah, we might have got sick, but there was already a lot of tension.
Like the straw that broke the camel's back, which I think is what is also happening with what's going around.
And it's pretty short-sighted.
Because people were already taxed, but they were just keeping their head above water. But then all it took was that one more, virus or what.
Sometimes the last extra mile is like just an inch.
Right, not very far at all. I agree.
And that's where in the functional medicine space and allopathic, that's where we're like maybe focus on that last trigger, and maybe we'll run a poop test or a blood test. We're like, hey, we killed your Lyme, or we got rid of your Candida. But then it's like, well, I still hate my spouse and I still hate my job, and I'm like, so we killed some Candida. Cool. Your body is still under so much tension,
But that still will help them cope better with other stress.
It will.
I mean, I feel like the healthier your body is functioning, the better you are capable of dealing with the stressors that come. Yeah, exactly. So.
And that's where, we want to, when I train, I've been in a position where I've been training doctors almost 5 years now, and we get to a
now
point.
Now you're talking functional medicine doctors
or
allopathic?
Functional medicine. And there's MDs, DOs, there's eye doctors and surgeons. Everybody just wants to, because functional medicine's a thought process. It's not really like a bunch of, I have way more alphabet soup than what I use. I just don't care, because it's not going to change how I'm going to help somebody or what we're going to figure out.
Well, let's
together.
talk about when someone does have an appointment with you. So how's that going to look like when they first come in?
Oh, there's already a lot of work that goes into it beforehand.
Okay.
Because my intake form is extraordinarily long, because to me, back to that point I was going to say, the test results are the easy part of things. Once you've seen, I've seen over 3,000 poop tests.
And the blood test is really just a small window.
That's just the window into the house. I say blood might be into the kitchen, but I think of the body as a house we can't get into. We're never really going to know the truth, no matter how much testing we run, believe it or not. But maybe we're only looking into the kitchen, but that doesn't tell me about the bathroom, the garage, the bedroom, the dining room. We want to look in all these windows to try to see as much of this house as we possibly can that we'll never really get inside.
Right.
So the test results are important, but we always want to put them in context. Everybody
context to their lifestyle.
Yeah, everybody listening to this has Candida. We wouldn't be alive without Candidas.
Right. It's part of our natural system.
Yeah, but they're opportunistic.
Because we have a lot of bacteria there.
Yeah, so then we think well, hey, what's allowing this Candida to start to overgrow? What's allowing them to seize this opportunity? We had
which can be sugar and carbohydrates. And
so diet can do it. Stress can definitely do it. Other molds. One of the things that scares me more than anything, I've been doing this a long time, when we find mold in somebody.
Right.
Because of all the natural things out there, even chemical made. Hey, if you cheat a little bit, maybe get some glyphosate here and there. Not the greatest thing, but if you're sensitive to mold and you're well, I only go in that room once every 3 days, it doesn't matter. Part of the problems with mold, since we're on that, is the people that are susceptible and wrecked by it, basically, they can't get rid of it. Their genes just won't work, so they stay inside. So we'll run like these mold tests, and maybe we'll run glyphosate tests. So we'll start running these P tests, what we call toxin tests.
So you have them fill out the paperwork.
Oh,
so
yeah.
So you look at
So,
that.
sorry, yeah.
And then you determine from there what
what's the right
they
test?
need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
And I'm sure they're coming to you generally with a
Yeah.
specific complaint,
Yeah.
usually.
I tell people that intake packet allows me to realize, like, what got you to today, like right here in this office right now, like, how did you get here?
Right.
Because if we have a pretty good idea of where we're at, then at least we can know where we need to go. Because most people with chronic health issues, they feel like they're lost in the woods. They're like, well, I'm going to try this. I'm going to run this way. Maybe I should circle back and go
And a
over
lot of them
here."
are trying to self-diagnose.
Yeah.
I've been down
Oh,
that
man.
path.
Yeah,
WebMD, you know, which
Yeah.
is really you probably shouldn't do because
Yeah, and-
everything you see, you're going to be like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what I
you
have.
know, a lot of people I work with are like, well, I'm already doing a lot. And I would say, I would expect you to, because no offense, if you haven't even changed your diet, like what we're about to do is overkill. Like, it makes me look like a rock star, because they might eliminate like 3 or 4 foods and be like, I'm sleeping, I lost 20 pounds, my rash and headaches went away. I love him. I'm like, you just kind of changed your diet.
Right.
Like, you know, I just knew what to tell you to do. But so we really want to see what led somebody to today. And I want to look at them too. Like, when they're like, hey, I'm tired, like, well, what does that mean? Like, the reasons you could be tired could be as numerous as the stars. And then we want to see, like, maybe what's some of the right testing. Like, well, this will show us some of that, why is this happening? And even maybe when we run, like, a poop test, or we'll look at someone's adrenals, one of my favorite tests is we just look at how our cell's working. You know, and that's where
How
we
the
don't...
cells are working?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
and how do you look at that?
P usually.
Oh, okay.
So a couple other...
I
and
love
that's
the
where
way
you
you're
got-
so slang instead of like fecal tests, urinalysis. You're just like
Yeah.
poop test, pee test.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah,
I just tell
exactly.
people, like, well, the good news is you're pooping pee. It could be worse. It could be like some random,
Yeah,
unless it's your kid. I'm like, but you've already been down that road, you know.
Yeah.
So that's where we just want to kind of get an idea of why, because back to the blood, you know, that's just so heavily filtered. You know, like we're saying, kidneys, liver, lungs, everything's trying to keep the blood as stable as
Right,
possible.
homeostasis.
And it should be,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So you're
but-
just saying by the time they draw your blood, it's already been filtered.
Yeah.
And might filter out any issues you might see.
Yeah,
before
exactly.
It was. Okay.
You know, like one of the common things that still gets repeated is like acidity and alkalinity.
I was going to ask you about how you
Well,
felt
you
about
know,
that
'cause
scale. Because
different-
personally, again,
different organs
know,
are supposed to be different pHs.
Right. But overall, I feel like when I eat an alkaline diet, I feel
Yeah.
so much better.
Well,
and I have more
that's what I say,
energy.
because you're doing a lot of things. Because food's never, like the thing with functional medicine, at the heart of it, like 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2 in the way that there's so many other numbers that can equal 2. So when we look at like one change, we can't really change one thing. Like, well, I ate a live alkaline. I'd be like, well, you also ate a lot more fiber. You fed your microbiome. There's less chemicals. Because by definition, a toxin, if we think of it like a true toxin, it can't be a toxin unless it elicits an immune response.
Okay.
So there's like some sludge that our body is like, hey, but like, for example, I deal with a lot of autoimmune people. Like Hashimoto's is one of the more common autoimmune diseases. The BPA in plastic can look exactly like a thyroid to an autoimmune person. So they might just be like getting a little plastic, or so for them, BPA is a true toxin.
Okay.
Their immune system's just like, I'm going to attack this. I'm going to go for it. And that's in that autoimmune case, for example. So that's where sometimes when we think of very strategic things, it takes little bitty shifts sometimes.
But how do you know if that the BPA is causing the problem? What are you
Oh,
doing?
you can run a lot of testing for that. Like we'll run, like, because that's where people are like, well, I want to know if I have to eliminate gluten. I'm like, that's a $300 test. I'm like, or you could just cut it out for a month and tell me
how
if
it
you
goes.
feel better. That's free.
So do you try an elimination diet then? with
Sometimes it depends where they're at. You know, like I said, I'll see a lot of people. Maybe they're like, yeah, I'm like raw vegan. Everything's like I'm on SIBO, low FODMAP. They've like painted themselves in this diet corner where they're like, I eat 10 foods and that's it, and anything else I feel like crap. I'm like, you didn't fix anything. You just avoided a lot of foods. Back to flexibility. We want the body to be flexible with foods too. Like a hallmark is people that can't fast. If they're reactive hypoglycemic, their body can't handle the change of just not trying to go without food for a little bit.
I've been trying intermittent fasting recently, and I like it. I really like
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I've been feeling good.
I prefer it to like a ketosis, like back to, I don't like to, because, which diet works. Like paleo is probably one of my favorites, but then I always say, well, what's paleo? Were your like ancestors in Japan? Were they in Russia? Were they in Samoa? Were they German? Were they South African? Like, where did all your ancestors grow up for thousands of years? Because, like, I know people that are Indian and they thrive on vegan and vegetarian diets, and I'll have someone that's maybe German try to be like, yeah, I tried to eat vegan, I felt terrible. But, like, please name a German ancestor that ate vegan, please. Like, and that's where we're so different.
Do you look at blood type as well? Or?
Sometimes there's some truth to that.
I read that blood type book years ago, and so I'm O positive, and I know that we're the carnivores and meat eaters, but I've really cut back. But I do find that I do need some animal protein, or I do start feeling either lightheaded, sometimes nauseous, or just weak. And I don't need a lot, and I've cut out red meat and pork. Just for me personally, I feel better. But I have noticed I still need some animal protein.
I mean, and that's where I try to think of, like, back to, I like for just people to eat more types of foods. Say back in the day, you wouldn't be like, well, this isn't AIP paleo, so I can't eat it. You would have said, hey, there's food. I haven't eaten today. I'm hungry and I want to live.
Yeah. But there also wasn't all the chemicals, the pollution, the sedentary lifestyles, people working in offices, or,
And then also when we think of the diet, like, to me, one of the biggest things that I try to change when we think about what's the right diet for somebody is what happens to that food after you eat it. Can people even digest and absorb it? Is the immune system attacking it? Are you feeding anything?
Do you have leaky gut?
Yeah, are you feeding anything
Which
down
isn't
there?
that common right now?
It can be, and that's where, like, there's some quotes that say, like, all disease starts in the gut, and I'd say, well, that's where he didn't live in an environment that we live in. So back then, like, the people that usually had chronic disease, I would say, would probably be more of the upper class, where they had the excess food, they were always eating all the time, they were drinking all the time, they weren't like maybe a commoner where they were like more fasted states and things like that. But, oh gosh, I forgot where we were just going.
Oh, just talking about when a patient comes to see you, and then so how do you? And then I know you put everybody on their own individual plan. Typically, what does that consist of? I know there's probably not a typical, but
and that's where there's usually
examples.
a few things, because we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. So we'll say, hey, here's some lifestyle things we can do, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't exercise, maybe you should do this instead. I'd rather have people focus 40% on 5 things than 100% on one thing. So if you put all your eggs in one basket, that's like the worst, because people that I've seen that have done that, it's that emotional roller coaster with chronic stress, because they're like, man, I hope this is it. I hope this is finally what makes me feel better. And then when it's not, you're just crushed type thing. So we want to focus on, well, what does this person probably need to hear more than anything? Like, if their diet's perfect, what are we going to talk about? I'll tell those people, like, you know more about your diet than I do at this point. Like, so let's not talk about that, because if diet was going to fix it, we wouldn't even be talking. Let's see, what do we need to know? Maybe there are some test results that really just unlock it. Because back to, like, there has to be experience with that too, as well.
Do you prescribe medication at all? Or?
No, I'm in DC. I can't do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I record, so I do everything on Zoom, and I record all those meetings.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that.
So that way, if
and a functional medicine doctor doesn't prescribe either? They're not?
They can if it's within their scope of practice. So that's where, like, I'm certified in functional medicine, but I still have to be a DC at the end of the day. Like, I can't tell somebody, like, hey, you should really stop that statin, I can say, hey, this statin is making it where you are having trouble making CoQ10, so now your cells aren't working, so we just want to offset that side effect of the medication.
Okay. That makes sense. Because it sounds to me like it's a lot about bringing your body back into balance and finding where the imbalance is.
And a lot of people I see are on a lot of medications, and that's the judgment-free zone. I just say, you didn't get there on accident. Like, if these 2 antidepressants are the ones that are keeping you from, like, going crazy and offing yourself, like, please keep taking them. Like, please. But on the back end, let's really figure out, why is your brain hurt so bad that you think that living isn't an option right now? Because to me, that's the sign of a sick, not to call us animals, but that's what a sick animal would do. You know what I'm saying? So that's...
Would do what? Off itself? or just go in a corner and die?
Just go off.
That's true.
Because when we think about, and unfortunately, if you look... not to sound harsh, but if you look at a lot of very sick people with chronic diseases, we'll have real conversations. I say, if it wasn't for your spouse or your kids or your parents or something, like, do you think that you would survive if you can't walk up 5 stairs? You couldn't gather food back in the day. You wouldn't have been able to pass on those genes.
Okay.
It's really kind of, not to sound so harsh, but when we think about, like, why are people getting in sicker and sicker, part of it to me could be also there's a lack of survival of the fittest anymore. Because, you know...
because they don't have to be, because there's so many systems and people that can...
you know,
and keep them going and enable them. Whereas if they were on their own, they might not make it.
And, you know, autoimmunity is just skyrocketing. We're trading out, like, maybe certain types of, like, diseases and deaths. Like, we're not dying of cholera anymore. But, like, that's where, like, I'm personally autoimmune. Like, if you're in the functional medicine space or dealing with anyone with chronic disease, I just tell the doctors that I train, like, if they give you a briefcase, like, here's my medical history, you should just be like, ding, 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 autoimmune, that somebody hasn't figured out yet. Because, like, osteoporosis can be autoimmune, infertility can be autoimmune. But anyways, I digress. So, you know, that's where a lot of triggers, actually. Autoimmunity is probably one of my biggest passions.
Right. Well,
you know,
it's rampant, too.
Yeah,
I almost know everybody that has autoimmune.
And those are the people that fall through the cracks the most, because the current answer is, let's shut off the immune system, which with autoimmunity, it's usually, it's not, I don't want to say usually, but a lot of the times it's an infectious trigger. Like, somebody will get food poisoning or strep, and they were never the same after that. They'll even say that.
And I've
they'll
heard
be like,
that.
Yeah, they'll just be like, yeah, like, we all got
forever.
food poisoning, we all threw up, we all had diarrhea. Like, my joints started hurting and never got better after that, doc.
And then it becomes systemic.
Yeah, and I'm like, so everyone had the same trigger, but you just had the genes, where now your body...
Or predisposed by an imbalance.
Yeah,
or something,
yeah.
right?
Well, with autoimmunity, there has to be genes.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so those are those HLA genes.
Now, is high blood pressure considered
Potentially,
autoimmune,
some reasons it can be. You know, usually, and that's where back to high blood pressure when we think of, well, that's usually a sympathetic, like, I love the brain. So if I'm exercising and my blood pressure rises, it's doing exactly what it should do, because it's dealing with stress.
Sure.
So when we think, hey, why is your blood pressure high? I mean, maybe is your brain telling us to do it? Are things so, like, are your pipes so inflexible they can't even deal with the pressure? So that's where with blood pressure medications, it's very common for people to say, I started with like 10 milligrams, now I'm up to 15, now they have to add in a second, my blood pressure keeps going up. And I'm like, yeah, because your body's still freaking out about something.
Right.
Like, you're still in this fight or flight stress response.
Well, and I think, I mean, personally, I got to a point where I almost addicted to being stressed. Like, I almost like that feeling of just intensity and working at high speed and, you know, the caffeine. I love caffeine. Yeah. But I could see, you know, it was just like burning me out. And that, you know, and at the time I was diagnosed with high blood pressure, because I never had it before. I mean, normal levels my whole life. And then I got a job where I was actually running a branch office here. So I was running a business. It wasn't my own business, but I was running the business in Oklahoma. And that's when, and I liked the job. It wasn't anything like that, but it was just a level of a responsibility that I had never had before. I had a staff, I had customers, clients, you know, and then, I mean, I must have just been, you know, stressed out and just trying to stay on top of everything. And that's when I went to the doctor I'd been going to for years. And she was even shocked. She was like, what? She sat me down and said, what is going on, Krista? Because I've never seen this. And I didn't even know. I was shocked because I didn't feel anything. I wasn't feeling any symptoms or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a silent killer.
Well, right. Because, I didn't know any different. I was like, what? And then I said, oh, it's just probably something going on today. So then, you know, she had me come back a week or two later, still high. And then from then on, you know, I was just kind of seeing this pattern. But then at times it would go down. But anyway, But I think a lot of people do get addicted, just the way our culture and society is.
It's the way our brains.
It was like a high almost for me. I like that high.
At the end of the day, like, I love looking at studies. Like, what I do in my spare time is read research articles. But I just say we're kind of rats in a maze. We learn how to ring different bells for different flavors of cheese. So if you look at maybe like an addictive personality, they'll usually just trade like addictions. They usually don't like get addiction free. So like, they maybe like say that one end of the extreme, they're like, hey, they do heroin, they go to rehab, but they still drink. Then they go to AA and they get addicted to coffee and caffeine.
Or food. Or
yeah,
something.
and then they're like, hey, now I'm going to get addicted to the gym, or they're addicted to sex or adrenaline. So all they're doing is still ding, ding, just hitting those dopamine receptors.
Right.
Because the brain just wants to feel normal.
Yeah.
And that's back to, I say, we just have to learn to ring different bells. That's back to some of like the gratitude. So I'll tell people, like, if you feel the need to go work out, I'm like, you should maybe just go help somebody instead. You'll get a different type of dopamine surge that way.
For sure.
But you're not still going to, like, feed that adrenal, like, like your dopamine surge came from more of a parasympathetic activity than this, like, go, 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 run, run, run.
Right.
Because all things being equal, like, back to some things we change, a lot of the times we focus on a lot of people's sleep. Sleep quality is just terrible. People are like, I sleep fine. I'm like, do you wake up refreshed? They're like, no. I'm like, let's try this again. How's sleep? And they're like, you're right, it's terrible. Like, a lot of chronic issues are like a bad relationship. You don't know how bad it is until you're out of it.
Right.
And then once people see the fog lifting and they're like, this is what it's like to have energy and to be able to think and decide and remember, they're like, oh my God, how did I do this for so long? I'm like, I don't know.
Right.
You just kind of get used to it, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
compensate.
Well, and
Post-it
since
notes
I've been
everywhere.
doing the intermittent fasting where I'm trying not to eat after 6:30, definitely not after 7. And then not eating again until maybe 10 a.m. the next morning, or even later, I'm sleeping great.
Yeah.
I guess not, and I wasn't eating late a lot, but just even making that difference to not eat after 6:30 or 7, then my food is digested for the most part, and I get the best, like a deeper sleep.
Well, it is rest or digest, so your brain has to kind of choose, because if there's food in your gut, you got to digest it. It won't just let it rot there all night.
Right.
But
which takes energy, even though you're not conscious of it. Yeah.
And your brain recharging the batteries and your organs doing their thing, that takes a tremendous amount of energy. Just because you don't remember what's happening doesn't mean stuff's not going on.
Exactly. You're not conscious of it.
When we think of, like, to me, that circadian rhythm, one of the bigger things is, like, light exposures, like blue lights and things like that. Like, people watch TV late at night or something, or they have these lights on. So we see light can affect it, but usually one of the first things will start to change is somebody's, like, feeding times. They're like, I eat right before I go to bed. I'm like, you're never going to sleep good that way. Yeah, like, just, so they're like, what can I do for my diet? And I'm like, maybe just change when you eat instead of changing what you eat. Then it's a little easier. You don't have to, like, clean out the pantry and throw all this food away. And
just start with simple little changes and see how each one affects you. And then I think as you start to feel better, it reinforces that new behavior. Yeah. At least that's how it works with me.
Because the body goes in a cleaning way with the longer you go without eating, the body starts to clean on a deep. Like, I have a Parkinson's patient. He'll eat in 2-hour windows. He doesn't eat less calories during that time. He's still getting, like, that 2,000.
He eats an only a 2-hour window? Wow.
Yeah. And his wife loves it. She's like, he's not kicking me in the middle of the night, keeping me awake. They used to have to sleep in separate beds because at night he would just, they kick. A lot of people with Parkinson's, their legs will move at night too because it's kind of the same part of the brain. Right. But no, they're like, I can sleep in a bed again. And that was while we were waiting on test results. So I was like, hey, can you go without? Yeah, I was like, could you go without eating? He's like, yeah, I can do that. I'm like, can you go 22 hours without eating? And you just eat supper and then have another second supper, like boom, boom, and just have real big meals? Like, yeah. Wow. And within a few weeks. So that's where, sometimes the answer is simple, but, simple doesn't always mean easy. Right. But I like simple.
I agree. And it is simple.
Because that's something that he can do, because if I just gave him a bunch of supplements to mimic fasting and mimic ketosis, then all I did was give him, like, just the powers in the pills, and then he just has to keep buying them. So I say,
and he's still dependent.
Yeah, they're supplements. They're not replacements. So I just tell people, like, you already have to be doing these things before I'm going to be like, hey, here's this list of pills based off the testing we saw. Because if you're not holding up your end of the deal, then you're not going to get better, and then you're going to say, hey, these pills didn't work. I'm like, man, you didn't work. And not to sound mean, but some people do have to take ownership for their own health. Like,
I'm sure. Everybody does, really. Yeah.
And, some
it really
people
comes down to our,
It can be ignorant. Like, I was tired. I had fatigue all the time. I quit eating gluten because I found out my wife's autoimmune. And I started to feel amazing. And that's where I just say, like, for the wrong person, a wrong food could just, like, there's no way I could feel good if I were to just keep eating that. And that's where I just, like, make a decision, because some people that don't understand, they might be like, oh, you can just have a little bit. And I'm like, would you tell a kid with a peanut allergy to, like, just have a little bit? Yeah, like, that's my peanuts. Like, that stuff makes me feel terrible on an autoimmune level, because back to autoimmunity being genes, gluten sensitivity genes are autoimmune genes. They're both those HLA genes.
Right.
So if I see anyone with autoimmune diseases and I'm like, nobody's told you to go gluten-free yet, and you've already been to, like, 5 functional medicine doctors, like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
Like, well, we're not covering the basics. You just, at that point, I would say. So not to sound like high and mighty, but I try to not have duh moments. Like, those are the worst, is to have a duh moment like 3 or 4 months into something.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm
like,
sure.
oh, I wish we would have been doing that the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to have it take that quite that long to help
exactly.
someone. Well, before we wrap it up, what I usually like to ask somebody is, if you want to share a little bit about your personal journey that brought you to functional medicine, because I find that most people find alternative healing methods by some personal route.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to share a little bit about that.
I mean, in hindsight, that's like, man, I could go back to, like, the red dye and the popcorn when I was a kid causing ADD symptoms. I've suffered a couple head injuries where I've actually lost consciousness, which is never good. Picked up a little PTSD from the military, but what really made me want to, because I'm Irish, I'll just live with anything wrong as long as I'm alive. Just shrug it off, But my wife, my fiance at the time, she's now my wife Julie, we were told, like, you probably just want to have kids, think about adopting. And then she was 23, and I was like, that's crap. Like, she is 23 years old. You can't tell me this is normal, that she shouldn't be able to have kids. So I ran my first poop test, Googled and looked at a lot of big words that I was like, what is this thing? It was like all these parasites and stuff. And
which is a whole nother topic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everybody has them. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and was doing all this stuff. And then she had her first cycle in 5 years, within 2 months of just doing this stuff. So her body wasn't making a mistake.
Which was what? Detoxing and cleansing?
Yeah, fixing the gut type thing.
Okay.
And that's what I tell people, like, your body's not making a mistake. It's just doing the best it can in the environment it's in.
Exactly.
That headache and not falling asleep, it's trying to tell you, like, you're not safe, you shouldn't be asleep, your head's hurting because something's causing, like, pain or some inflammation. Like, duh moments, right?
Right.
Anyways, and then she didn't have a cycle. And I was like, man, we lost it. But then we found out she was pregnant. So my daughter's 7.5. My wife's pregnant again.
I know. And you have a beautiful family.
Thank
it's such
you.
a blessing.
Yeah, and that's where, I'm in a position, like, for my daughter's health, because I know both me and my wife are autoimmune. And I'm like, hey, these are genes. So I can just do prophylactically. Like, my daughter she had gluten once. And that's because the daycare didn't see the box that we checked that said only feed her. So it was kind of an irksome moment, but I mainly did it in a nutshell because, like, I just saw the health of my loved ones eroding, and nobody was giving us answers. And
in allopathic medicine.
Yeah, and I realized I was like, hey, I can order tests. I was like, I'm a doctor, I can order any test I want.
Right.
So she was
because you were already a chiropractor at that point.
Yeah, so she was my guinea pig.
But you did a good job because now baby number 2 on the way.
And then, and then I never looked back after that because I thought, actually, I spent a decade of my life, like, I'm going to work with athletes, like 40 times with pads on, overhead pitching, the whole 9. And then after my wife got pregnant, and I started to see people with autoimmune diseases, like, getting off medications that they were told they'd be on for the rest of their life. I was like, who cares about low back pain? Nothing against someone in low back pain. I've herniated a disc, so trust me.
Me too.
I know what it feels like.
Me too.
But to me, that's not my jam. That's not why I wake up in the morning. I'd rather help somebody like, hey, I'm not able to have kids. I think I'm at risk for Parkinson's and my joints hurt. But, like, well, let's take care of that now. So you think it's bad now, you don't want to wait for 20 years, This is chronic.
Exactly.
And that's where I would say, to me, one of the things is we try to position people, like, give them the power back.
Oh, I love that.
Because if I can teach somebody to do, like, 5 things that they can do for the rest of their life, that's way better than any pills will ever be able to give them. Exactly.
I agree 100%. Well, I think it's a beautiful methodology. I'm a big believer in it, and I know that alternative medicine has helped me a lot, whereas allopathic medicine failed me, and I plan to share that at some point because it's what led me to even want to do this podcast.
You know, I always want to ask, people say alternative medicine. I say alternative to what?
Yeah.
Like we were talking about reishi or Ganoderma before this. That's been used for 5,000 years in Chinese medicine.
Good point. That's a good point. But I think sometimes it's still viewed, because everybody, thinks of conventional medicine as the go-to, and that's what's going to help them. And sometimes it's not. And, it can be beneficial to look outside of that. Yeah. And that, had been very helpful to me in my personal journey. And so I want to help others where they might be able to discover that there are other methods of healing.
Yeah. It's like Henry Ford said, if you would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. They didn't even know a car existed.
I love it.
So and that's where
you have some great analogies.
Well, I've been doing it a while. So,
no.
But that's where I just think, man, if people just knew, back to going to the mall and talking about, if 100 people knew who that was, I'd be more stoked than who cares about a Kardashian? Probably gonna get sued because we mentioned their name type thing.
Oh no, it's maybe cut that out.
Yeah, right. But and that's where it's who cares?
Yeah.
Let's talk about real stuff, because people are dying. We're the sickest country out there.
I know.
For the first time in history, my daughter's generation is not expected to live as long as me, and I think my daughter's not going to be a statistic.
And
there's
that
no
is
way.
We should be saying 911. I mean, this is urgent.
It's a true epidemic.
It really
when
is
you look
an epidemic.
At chronic disease,
I agree.
I deal with a lot of autistic kids, and the amount of autistic boys is it's becoming one of these types of curves. It's raising exponentially. Mm-hmm. Some people that are good at predictive models, which I pray to God they're wrong, they're by 2050, 1 in 2 boys is supposed to be somewhere on the spectrum. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think to me, that's society shutting down.
Yeah, I agree.
I can handle some joint pain and being tired, but if
because that's our future, really, and if they're non-functioning or not functioning to capacity.
I love Weston A. Price, but they did they did the cat study. And all they did was feed cats, real cats, what cats eat in nature, and a synthetic diet. And after 3 generations, the cats couldn't even reproduce anymore. And if you think back to 1996, it's now 2020, 24 years, sorry. Hey, we're about getting on that second generation now. Mm-hmm. And look at how sick these kids are.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a lot of people have reproductive issues, too.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you've lived that personally. Yeah. So, there's something contributing to that.
Humans, if you actually look at a numbers thing, we're an endangered species because our lifespan is decreasing and our fertility rates aren't able to pace it. Mm-hmm. So actually, because males, I believe, have something half the amount of sperm they used to just a few years ago.
Oh, no.
And 1 out of, I believe, 4 or 5 women have some fertility issues at some point.
Right.
And I'm that's 25%, 50%. I'm that. You start adding
huge
percentages, we're that's a big shift. And a lot of people don't even want kids anymore.
Right.
So.
Well, so how would someone get a hold of you if they would like to set an appointment with you? And you
Facebook. No, I'm kidding.
Facebook. And you do all of your appointments over Zoom, so you can consult with anybody outside of the Oklahoma, nationwide.
It's nice because then people don't have to travel and take off work and stuff. I usually just have people go to speakwithjared.com.
Okay.
And then they fill out a little form and schedule a discovery call. It lets me get to know just a little bit more about them. They can learn a little bit more about me. And then we can see before we really invest a lot of time and money and resources, is this a good fit? Because to me at that little short 15, 20-minute call, I just try to see, can I help them? Are they going to do what it takes? And do we like each other? Mm-hmm. To me, if those 3, if any of them are a no, then I just say, hey, maybe we shouldn't take the next step forward. Maybe here's a colleague that I've trained that could maybe help you, see if y'all are a good fit.
Right.
But if they're no, let's do it, then to me the minutia is what diet, what tests. I've been down that path a lot. Of course, it's the first time for everyone else, and that's where it's always going to be a different path. But, and that's where we want to make sure there's the support, a realistic time frame. So we're not going to fix 20 years of migraines in a visit. That's unrealistic. If you're expecting that, sorry, that's not the way it works.
Right, exactly.
So we want to have realistic expectations too.
Okay, all right. So speakwithjared.com. I will post a link below this video so that you can visit his site. And thank you so much for being here today. I could really talk to you all day long.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this has been great. This has been great. So, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Remember, health is wealth and nature is the best medicine. And in the words of Hippocrates, disease, let food be thy medicine. This is Krista Townsend with Phoenix Rising, wishing you the best of health. Take care.